Only friend you ever had was the damn army. My brother sneered at Dad's funeral, his words cutting deeper than any wound I'd ever suffered. Before I could react, he snatched the sealed letter from my hands, the last message from our father to me, and fed it into the roaring cremation flames. I watched in shock as Dad's final words turned to ash, the crowd silent around us, humiliated and seething. I caught the steady gaze of Colonel Hayes across the room. Sam had no idea the storm that was coming. But before we begin, let me know where in the world you're watching from today. It's always fascinating seeing who's joining us from around the world. My name is Michael R. Callahan, and I'm 33 years old. I spend my nights in a cramped studio apartment, surviving on VA disability checks, while my prescribed painkillers barely touch the constant ache in my leg. Growing up, I learned everything about cars from my father James at his auto shop, Callahan and Sons, where grease and dedication were our daily bread. My older brother Sam, now owner of the garage, always resented how Dad's eyes lit up watching me work. He'd rather count profits than get his hands dirty. After my military service left me with 2 Purple Hearts and a medical discharge, I came home to find everything changed. But I've got one ace they don't know about. My old footlocker, cable locked and hidden away, holding proof of what really happened while I was deployed. But let me start from the beginning. The January wind cut straight through my dress blues as I limped across the cemetery, already 15 minutes late. My knee had given out on a patch of ice that morning, and the resulting fall didn't help my usual hobble. You'd think after all these years I'd have learned to manage winter better, but pain has a way of making you forget the simple stuff. Everyone was already gathered under the green funeral canopy when I arrived. Must have been 30 people there, mostly Dad's old customers and a few faces I recognized from the shop. The moment I stepped onto the frozen grass, their heads turned, not because I was late, but because I'd shown up at all. You could feel the judgment hanging thick in the air, heavier than the clouds threatening snow above us. Sam stood at the podium in his $1,000 suit, all polished and proper, like he was addressing a board meeting instead of saying goodbye to our father. The sight of him made my stomach turn. He'd always been good at putting on a show, wearing whatever mask the moment required. Today it was the grieving eldest son, responsible inheritor of the family legacy. Our father was a man of principle, Sam droned on, his voice as mechanical as a fuel injection system. He built this business from nothing, taught us the value of hard work. Each word felt rehearsed, empty. I could almost hear Dad in my head. Son, a man's truth lives in his hands, not his mouth. Those hours we spent together under the hood of some broken-down Chevy, his calloused fingers guiding mine around a wrench, that was real. This performance? Pure theater. I shifted my weight, trying to ease the throbbing in my knee. Mrs. Peterson, our old neighbor, caught my eye and quickly looked away. They all did that now. These people who'd known me since I was knee-high to a tire jack. Like I was some ghost that had wandered in from another life. Sam was wrapping up his eulogy when his mask slipped. His eyes locked onto mine, cold as steel. And while some abandoned their responsibilities for other pursuits, he paused, letting the poison seep into his words. Dad never lost faith in the business. The only friend you ever had was the damn army. My fingers clenched into fists before I could stop them. I felt the scab on my right knuckle split open, a souvenir from my morning fall. A drop of blood rolled down between my fingers, but I didn't dare move to wipe it away. Wouldn't give him the satisfaction. The ceremony ended, and people began drifting away in small clusters, their shoes crunching on frozen grass. I stood my ground, even as Sam's smirk told me he was savoring his little victory. That's when I heard the footsteps behind me, measured, purposeful, military. I turned to find Colonel Hayes emerging from behind a tall headstone, his presence as solid as ever. Even in civilian clothes, everything about him screamed army, from his ramrod-straight posture to his mirror-polished shoes. The colonel had been my commanding officer, the kind of leader who knew every soldier's story and carried their burdens as his own. His face was grim, darker than I'd seen it since that day in Kandahar. Without a word, he reached into his coat and pulled out an envelope. The paper was thick, expensive, the kind Dad used for important contracts. My name was written across the front in Dad's precise mechanic's handwriting. The colonel pressed it into my hand, his weathered fingers lingering for a moment longer than necessary. Before I could process what was happening, Sam's hand shot out like a striking snake. "What the hell is this?" he snarled, all pretense of dignity forgotten. He lunged forward, trying to snatch the envelope from my grasp. I stumbled back, my bad knee nearly buckling. But Sam was faster, decades of resentment fueling his movements. His fingers closed around the edge of the envelope, and I could see in his eyes that whatever was inside, he already knew its contents, and he was terrified of them. Sam moved with a purpose I hadn't seen since we were kids racing for the last slice of Mom's apple pie. Before I could tuck Dad's letter away, he snatched it and stormed toward the funeral home's back entrance. My knee screamed as I lurched after him, but he had too much of a head start. "Sam, don't you dare!" I shouted, limping as fast as I could through the building's dim hallway. The smell of flowers and formaldehyde made my head swim. He shouldered through a heavy metal door marked "Staff Only." By the time I caught up, he was already standing in front of the cremation chamber, its orange glow painting his face in demonic light. Our eyes met for a second, his filled with a cold triumph that made my blood run cold. "Some things are better left buried, little brother," he said, and fed the envelope straight into the flames. The expensive paper curled and blackened instantly. Dad's last words to me disappeared forever in a flash of orange and blue. Colonel Hayes appeared in the doorway behind me, his face carved from granite. "That was a mistake, son," he said quietly. But Sam just straightened his tie and brushed past us both without another word. I stood there watching the last ashes of Dad's letter drift away until a staff member politely but firmly asked me to leave. The colonel offered me a ride home, but I needed to walk, needed to feel the bitter January wind cut through me. Maybe it would numb the rage building in my chest. By the time I made it back to my apartment, night had fallen, and my knee felt like it was full of broken glass. I sat on the edge of my bed, staring at the old footlocker shoved against the far wall. 9 years of dust had settled on its olive drab surface. 9 years since I'd locked away everything that reminded me of who I used to be. The aircraft cable I'd used to seal it was still tight, the combination lock green with corrosion. My hands shook as I dialed the numbers. 673. The street address of Dad's garage. The lock clicked open. The smell hit me first. Old canvas, gun oil, desert sand. My service medals clinked together as I lifted out my dress uniform, still crisp despite years of storage. Underneath lay my field journal, dog tags, and a stack of letters from Dad that I'd never had the courage to reread. But what I was looking for lay at the very bottom, wrapped in an old t-shirt, Dad's vintage snap-on toolbox. The steel was still polished to a mirror shine, just like the day he'd handed it to me before my first deployment. "Keep this safe," he'd said. "There might come a day when you need what's inside more than any wrench or socket." The familiar weight settled in my lap as I lifted it out. The key was still on my ring, right next to the one for the garage that Sam had changed the locks on 2 days after Dad went into the hospital. The toolbox lid creaked open. No tools inside. Instead, I found a thick manila envelope, the paper yellowed with age. My hands trembled as I pulled out the contents. Military discharge papers, service records, medical reports from my time in the VA hospital. But something was wrong. The dates were off. The signatures didn't match. Then I saw it. A notarized letter from Dad's lawyer dated 3 years ago, when I was still fighting through rehab and physical therapy. The words jumped off the page like they were printed in neon. Suspected fraudulent documentation. Unauthorized modification of military discharge status. Samuel Callahan's signature forged on multiple occasions. My vision blurred as the pieces clicked into place. While I was laid up in the VA hospital, doped up on painkillers and trying to learn to walk again, Sam had been busy. He'd forged paperwork, changed my honorable discharge to dishonorable, all so he could trigger some clause in Dad's will that cut me out completely. The toolbox held more: bank statements, property records, even photos of Sam meeting with people I didn't recognize. Dad had been building a case, gathering evidence, and now I knew why Sam was so desperate to destroy that letter. He thought he'd erased all traces of his betrayal, but Dad was always 3 steps ahead when it came to protecting his legacy. Like he used to say, a good mechanic keeps his best tools hidden until the job requires them. I spent the night at my kitchen table, papers spread out like battlefield maps, making copies of everything. My hands wouldn't stop shaking, not from withdrawal this time, but from pure, burning anger. The sun was barely up when I parked across from the garage. The place looked different, too different. Gone was Dad's weathered sign, replaced by some fancy LED monstrosity. Callahan Premium Auto Care. The gravel lot where we used to park project cars had been paved over, lined with perfect white stripes. Even the brick had been pressure-washed clean of 30 years of honest grime and motor oil. This wasn't a mechanic's shop anymore. It was some kind of sterile showroom fantasy. You know that feeling when something familiar becomes foreign, like coming home after deployment to find your bedroom turned into a home office? That's what hit me as I limped toward those gleaming glass doors. The place even smelled wrong. Air freshener instead of gasoline and rubber. Sam was behind the new granite counter, tapping away at a laptop. He didn't even look up. "We're not open yet." "Make time," I said, dropping the stack of copies in front of him. "We need to talk about these." He glanced at the top page, just for a second, but I caught the micro-expression, that tiny flash of recognition before his face went blank again. "I don't know what you think these prove." "They prove you're a fraud." My voice was steady, calmer than I felt. "You forged my discharge papers while I was still in the VA hospital. Changed them from honorable to dishonorable so you could trigger Dad's inheritance clause. That's federal fraud, Sam. Military fraud." He closed his laptop with a soft click. "You always did have an active imagination. Must be all those pills they had you on." He smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "How are you doing with that, by the way? Still clean?" My fists clenched. He was trying to bait me, but I wasn't going to give him the satisfaction. "I'm taking these to a lawyer. You can either make this right now or..." "Or what?" He stood up slowly, straightening his tie. "You'll try to strong-arm me? Throw around military credentials you don't have anymore?" He reached for his phone. "I'm calling the sheriff. You're trespassing." "Trespassing? This is my father's shop." "No," he said, punching in numbers. "It's my shop. Has been since you decided getting shot at was more important than family." He held up a finger as someone answered. "Yes, hello. I need officers at Callahan Premium Auto Care. I have an unstable individual threatening me." I couldn't believe what I was hearing. "Sam, don't do this. He seems intoxicated, possibly violent." Sam continued, watching me with cold eyes. "Yes, that's right. 1467 Mason Street." Less than 5 minutes later, I heard sirens. 2 patrol cars pulled up outside, lights flashing. The morning customers getting coffee next door stopped to stare. "Officers," Sam called out as they entered, "thank you for coming so quickly. This is the individual I called about." "Sir, turn around and put your hands behind your back," one deputy ordered. "This is ridiculous. He's lying." I have proof right here that he—" The cuffs snapped shut before I could reach for the papers. They weren't gentle about it either. My bad knee buckled as they pushed me toward the door. "Should we run him for outstanding warrants?" the second deputy asked. Sam made a show of looking concerned. "Probably wise. He has a history of substance issues." I tried to twist around. "Sam, you can't—" "Stop resisting," the first deputy barked, shoving me harder. They marched me outside past the growing crowd of onlookers. Mrs. Chen from the nail salon was there. She used to bring us cookies when we worked late. Now she just shook her head and turned away. The deputies pushed me into the back of their cruiser, my knee screaming in protest. Sam walked over and leaned down to the window. The tint was dark enough that only I could see his expression. That same smug look he'd had at the funeral. "Should have died overseas where you're useful," he said quietly. Then he straightened up, adjusted his tie, and walked back into my father's shop like he owned it. Because right now, he did. I spent that night in county lockup, staring at concrete walls and trying not to think about Sam's smirk through that patrol car window. The thin mattress didn't do my knee any favors, and every time I shifted, the springs creaked like they were laughing at me. You ever notice how jail cells smell exactly like elementary school cafeterias? Same industrial cleaner, same underlying hint of despair. Morning came with the usual jailhouse symphony. Metal doors clanging, deputies shouting names for processing. I wasn't expecting visitors, so when the guard called "Callahan, window 3, my heart did a little jump. Colonel Hayes stood on the other side of the scratched plexiglass, ramrod straight in his civilian clothes. Even without the uniform, you could spot military bearing from a mile away. The early morning sun through the high windows cast him in shadow, but I could see enough to know he wasn't happy. "You look like hell, son," he said into the phone receiver. "Feel worse." My voice was gravel rough from lack of sleep. "How'd you find me?" "Called in some favors. VA's got friends in the sheriff's department." He leaned forward, lowering his voice. "Speaking of favors, I've got your release papers processing. Should be out within the hour." I blinked. "Just like that?" "Just like that. But we need to talk. There's a diner called May's about 2 miles from here. Meet me there when they spring you." True to his word, I was walking through May's front door by 9 a.m., bell jingling overhead. The place hadn't changed since I was a kid. Same cracked vinyl booths, same coffee-stained menus, same pictures of local sports teams on wood-paneled walls. The smell of bacon grease and maple syrup hit me like a time machine. The colonel sat in the back corner booth, 2 coffee cups already waiting. I slid in across from him, my knee protesting the tight squeeze. "Black. 2 sugars," he said, pushing 1 cup toward me. "Your dad always took it the same way." I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, letting the heat seep into my stiff fingers. "You didn't bail me out just to share coffee." "No." He reached down and pulled up a worn leather ledger, setting it carefully on the table between us. "I got this from your father's records room yesterday. Sam doesn't know it exists." My father's handwriting filled the pages. Neat columns of numbers, dates, notes spanning nearly a decade. Each entry meticulously detailed money flowing in and out of the shop. But something wasn't right with the math. "Your brother's been busy," the colonel said, pointing to a series of highlighted figures. "Took out loans against the garage. Big ones, $250,000 worth." The coffee turned bitter in my mouth. "Without disclosure?" "Without anyone knowing. But your father suspected something. Started tracking discrepancies about 3 years ago." He flipped through more pages. "Sam's been skimming profits, cooking the books, moving money around. Your dad documented all of it. 9 years of theft laid out in faded ink. 9 years while I was getting shot at overseas. Sam was bleeding our father's legacy dry." Something tightened in my throat. Not quite anger, not quite grief. Like a screw slowly rusting into bone. The colonel pulled out a manila envelope, spreading more papers across the table. Banks calling in the loans in 90 days. Foreclosure proceedings start then unless the full amount gets paid. 90 days? The number hit like a punch to the gut. That's not enough time to... He held up a hand, cutting me off. Then he leaned in close, voice dropping to barely above a whisper. Listen carefully. I've got a plan, but we have to move fast. The bell over the door jingled again. A young family walked in, the kids racing each other to the counter. Their laughter felt wrong against the weight of what the colonel was about to tell me. He pushed my coffee cup aside, spreading out the documents between us. The morning sun caught the edge of Dad's ledger, highlighting years of careful record-keeping that would either save or destroy everything our family had built. The colonel and I set up our war room in a borrowed VA conference space, all bare walls and fluorescent lights. But it had what we needed: privacy and plenty of space to spread out evidence. The familiar smell of institutional coffee and old paperwork brought me right back to mission briefings overseas. Funny how some things stick with you. Start with the loan documents, the colonel said, clearing a space on the metal table. Work backward from there. For 3 weeks straight, we pieced it together like a jigsaw puzzle made of numbers. Dad's ledger became our Bible. Every entry cross-referenced against bank statements, tax records, and inventory lists. The colonel's JAG contact, Captain Martinez, joined us most evenings after her regular duties, bringing legal expertise and enough energy drinks to fuel a platoon. "The pattern's clear as day," she said one night, tapping her pen against a stack of highlighted papers. "Your brother created ghost inventory, inflated sales figures, then used those projections to secure the loans. Classic fraud." I rubbed my tired eyes. "Can we prove it? With these records? Absolutely. We'll need subpoenas for the bank documentation, but the case is solid." The colonel nodded, his face grim. "File them first thing tomorrow." Time's running short. The courthouse steps felt steeper than I remembered when we arrived for the hearing. Sam was already there, looking expensive in a tailored suit, surrounded by 3 attorneys who probably billed more per hour than I made in a month. He didn't even glance my way. Inside, the courtroom smelled of old wood and anxiety. Judge Harrison peered down at us over half-moon glasses, his expression bored. I recognized him from the country club photos in Sam's office. They played golf together every Sunday. Captain Martinez presented our evidence methodically, laying out the trail of financial manipulation. But when she tried to enter Dad's ledger into evidence, Sam's lead attorney stood up. "Objection, Your Honor. This document is hearsay. We have no way to authenticate these alleged records, and the deceased cannot be questioned about their validity." The judge barely hesitated. "Sustained. The ledger is inadmissible." My stomach dropped. Without Dad's careful documentation, we had nothing concrete to prove the timing of Sam's scheme. One by one, the judge threw out our key evidence: bank statements, inventory records, even the forged discharge papers. Each rejection felt like another bullet hitting body armor. You survive it, but the impact still knocks the wind out of you. "Case dismissed for lack of evidence," Judge Harrison announced, already gathering his papers to leave. Sam's lawyers were shaking hands, smirking, while Sam himself just straightened his tie with a satisfied little tug. The colonel's face stayed perfectly still throughout the ruling. That practiced military mask I knew too well. But I saw his knuckles whiten where he gripped the table edge. This kind of defeat was worse than any firefight. In combat, at least you could shoot back. "We're not done," the colonel said quietly as we left the courthouse. "There are other angles we can work." I barely heard him. 9 years of service had taught me to recognize a lost position when I saw one. We'd played our best hand and come up empty. The sun was setting by the time we drove back to the garage. I needed to see it, needed to remind myself what we were fighting for. But as we turned onto the street, red and blue lights strobed through the growing darkness. 3 fire trucks were parked at crazy angles, their hoses snaking across the pavement like giant black pythons. The Colonel slammed on the brakes. Through the windshield, I watched flames reach up through the garage's roof, orange fingers clawing at the night sky. Smoke poured from the broken windows where Dad and I used to sit drinking sodas after closing time. The sign he'd hand-painted 40 years ago curled and blackened in the heat. Firefighters moved in silhouette against the inferno, their efforts already shifting from save the building to contain the damage. The heat hit me as soon as I stepped out of the car, a physical wall of it that smelled like burning oil and melting rubber and the end of everything. My legs went weak. The Colonel's hand gripped my shoulder, holding me upright as we watched 3 generations of family history burn to ash. I stood there watching my childhood dissolve into smoke and ash. The heat pressed against my face like a furnace door left open, carrying with it the stench of burning rubber, scorched metal, and decades of memories going up in flames. You know that feeling when your whole world shrinks down to a single point of pain? That's where I was. Nothing to be done now, one of the firefighters said, his voice muffled behind his mask. Building's too far gone. Had to switch to containment mode. I barely registered his words. Through the thick smoke, I could see the outline of Dad's office where he'd taught me to balance the books. The customer waiting area where Mrs. Henderson would bring us homemade cookies every Friday. The lift where I'd first learned to change oil at 12 years old. All of it turning to carbon and ash. Limited access, another firefighter called out. Structures compromised. Stay back. The Colonel stood beside me, solid as granite, while emergency lights painted everything in surreal flashes of red and blue. Neither of us spoke. What was there to say? We watched the last flames reach through the collapsed roof like desperate fingers clawing at the night sky. When dawn finally started creeping over the horizon, the firefighters began their sweep. Not much left to save, mostly twisted metal and charred timber. But then one of them emerged from the wreckage, holding something small and blackened. "Found these," he said, extending his gloved hand. "Military tags, looks like." My dog tags. I'd kept a spare set hanging in Dad's office all those years overseas. Now they were barely recognizable, melted and fused together, edges warped by the intense heat. I reached out and took them, not caring that they were still hot enough to sting my palm. The pain felt right somehow, felt real. The Colonel watched me grip those mangled tags until my knuckles went white. He didn't try to stop me, didn't offer empty words of comfort. He understood. Sometimes a man needs to hold on to his pain for a while, let it sink deep enough to fuel whatever comes next. As the last fire hose sprayed jets of water that turned to steam in the morning air, something inside me just gave up. All those years of fighting, in the army, against addiction, for Dad's legacy, felt suddenly pointless. What was left to fight for? A pile of ashes and some melted dog tags? "Let's go," the Colonel said quietly. His hand on my shoulder was steady, grounding. The drive back to my apartment passed in a blur. I don't remember if the Colonel said anything. Don't remember climbing the stairs or unlocking my door. Just remember sitting in the dark, still smelling smoke in my clothes, while the sun rose and set 3 times. Didn't eat, barely slept. Just sat there letting memories wash over me like waves. Dad teaching me to rebuild a carburetor. The pride in his eyes when I enlisted. Sam's sneer at the funeral. The judge dismissing our case. Flames consuming everything we'd built. Those dog tags sat on my coffee table the whole time, a twisted monument to everything I'd lost. I stared at them until they stopped looking like metal and started looking like what they really were. Proof that someone wanted me gone. Wanted every trace of my existence wiped away. On the 3rd day, I picked up those charred tags. They were cool now, but heavy with purpose. My throat was raw from 3 days of silence when I whispered, "Time for war." The words hung in the stale apartment air like smoke, like a promise. The colonel's truck rumbled down I-95 toward Fort Bragg, each mile marker ticking past like a countdown. I hadn't been back to base since my discharge. Funny how some places can feel like both home and prison at the same time. "You sure about those documents?" the colonel asked, eyes steady on the road. I patted the manila envelope in my lap. Dad kept originals of everything, even made copies, distributed them to safety deposit boxes. Sam never knew. The morning sun caught the colonel's slight smile. "Your old man was one careful son of a gun." That brought back a memory sharp as engine grease. Dad hunched over his desk late at night, methodically filing every receipt, every form in triplicate. "Trust paperwork," he'd say, "because people lie, but dates don't." The JAG building hadn't changed. Same red brick, same polished brass sign, same starched uniforms moving with purpose. My leg was acting up something fierce as we climbed the steps, but I didn't let it show. Some habits die hard. Inside, the air conditioning hit like a wall of winter. A young captain met us, all business behind his desk. I spread out the documents. My original honorable discharge papers, Sam's forged dishonorable ones, Dad's notarized statements about dates and signatures. The captain's eyebrows climbed higher with each page. "This is extensive," he said finally. "Give us a few hours to verify everything." Those few hours felt like years. The colonel and I sat in plastic chairs, drinking terrible coffee from paper cups. Neither of us talked much. What was there to say? Either the evidence would hold up, or it wouldn't. At 1400 hours sharp, the captain returned with 2 senior investigators. Their faces told me everything before they spoke a word. "The forgery is confirmed," the captain said. "Multiple counts of document fraud, false statements to federal authorities, misappropriation of veterans' benefits." He paused. "Your brother's looking at serious charges." I should have felt triumph. Instead, I just felt tired. "It's not enough." The colonel nodded, understanding. "Legal's one thing, public's another. Sam's got friends in high places." That's when I remembered Dad's customer ledger. Not the business one, but his personal one. The small leather book where he'd kept names, numbers, stories of every person whose car he'd ever fixed. I pulled it from my jacket, its pages worn soft as old dollar bills. "Mind if I use your phone?" For the next 3 hours, I worked through that ledger like a man mining for gold. Some numbers were disconnected. Some people had moved on or passed away, but others picked up, and their voices carried memories. Jim Callahan's boy, the soldier. Mr. Peterson, who'd driven trucks in Nam, remembered Dad helping him start his hauling business. "Your daddy kept my first rig running when I couldn't afford parts." Mrs. Henderson's husband had passed, but she still recalled Dad staying late to fix their station wagon when their daughter went into labor. "No charge," she said. He just said, "Family takes care of family." Each call added another piece, another connection. Some asked about the garage's foreclosure. News travels fast in small towns. I told them the truth. About Sam's fraud, about the fire, about Dad's legacy burning away. Then I called Howard Chen. He'd been quiet back in the day, just brought his cars in, paid cash, never said much. But Dad had written in the ledger, "Former Force Recon. Good man. Remember his birthday." "Would you protect your father's name?" Howard asked after I explained everything. His voice carried the weight of someone who understood exactly what that question meant. I gripped the phone tighter. "With everything I have. Then we'll be there," he said simply. "Just tell us when." By sunset, the colonel and I had filled 3 pages with names and numbers. People who remembered. People who cared. People who understood that some things matter more than money or legal papers. "Quite an army you're building," the colonel said, looking over the list. I thought about Sam's smirk at the funeral, about Dad's burned office, About all those years of betrayal. Not an army, I corrected him. A family. The colonel's eyes met mine, sharp with approval. And family shows up. Auction day dawned cold and clear. The kind of morning that makes your bones ache and your breath cloud like cigarette smoke. I stood across the street from Dad's garage, or what was left of it after the fire, watching the sun creep over the scorched roof. The colonel pulled up in his truck right at 7, thermos of coffee in one hand, stack of papers in the other. Ready? I nodded, though my stomach was doing backflips. We'd spent weeks preparing for this moment, but seeing the public auction sign planted in front of Dad's life's work made everything feel surreal. They'll be here by 8, the colonel said, checking his watch. Bank representatives, potential buyers. A rumble of engines cut him off. Not the sleek sound of bankers' cars, but the steady growl of well-maintained older vehicles. They came from every direction. Pickup trucks, classic muscle cars, even a few restored military vehicles. And behind their wheels sat faces I recognized from Dad's ledger. Mr. Peterson's semi blocked the eastern approach. Howard Chen's restored Jeep took the west. Mrs. Henderson's station wagon, now driven by her grandson, sealed off the south. Within minutes, the entire block was surrounded. "Would you look at that?" the colonel murmured, a rare smile crossing his face. Veterans in their old service caps stood shoulder to shoulder with mechanics in oil-stained coveralls. Some held signs, "Justice for Jim Callahan," and "No sale to frauds." Others just stood silent, arms linked, forming an unbreakable chain around the property. At 8 sharp, the news vans arrived. I recognized the Channel 5 logo. They'd covered the fire. Cameras started rolling as reporters pushed through the crowd, shoving microphones at anyone who'd talk. "We're here because Jim Callahan was more than a mechanic," Howard Chen told one reporter, his voice carrying the quiet authority of a Marine. "He was family to this community." The bank officials showed up next, their polished shoes and briefcases looking out of place among the work boots and weathered faces. They huddled near their cars, making frantic phone calls. That's when Sam's BMW screamed around the corner. He jumped out, clutching a clipboard, his lawyer right behind him. The confident smirk froze on his face as he took in the scene. For a second, he looked like that kid who'd gotten caught stealing from the register years ago, panicked, cornered. "This is illegal," he shouted, but his voice cracked. "You can't block a legal auction." "Actually," the colonel stepped forward, 2 thick envelopes in his hand. "We're just here to serve some papers." The cameras swung toward them like hungry animals. "Samuel Callahan," a court officer emerged from the crowd. "You're hereby served with notice of criminal charges for military document fraud and civil litigation for embezzlement totaling $318,000. Sam's lawyer grabbed for the papers, but Sam just stood there, face draining of color as the flashbulbs popped. His clipboard clattered to the ground. "No," he whispered, then louder. "You can't prove." "We already have," I said, my voice carrying across the sudden quiet. "Every forged document, every stolen dollar." Dad kept receipts. The crowd started cheering. Reporters shouted questions. Sam's lawyer tried to hustle him toward the BMW, but the damage was done. His perfect image was cracking like old paint under pressure. I turned away from the chaos, limping through the charred doorway of the garage. The foundation stones were still solid. Dad had laid them himself back in '72. I pressed my palm against the sooty brick, feeling the rough texture that had survived fire and fraud. A faint scent of motor oil still clung to the walls, mixed with ash and memory. Somewhere in this rubble was the spot where Dad first taught me to change spark plugs, where he'd bandaged my cuts and praised my welds and showed me that good work speaks louder than words. The colonel appeared beside me, his presence steady as always. Through the empty doorframe, we could see Sam being swarmed by reporters, his careful facade crumbling on live television. Your father would be proud, the colonel said quietly. I kept my hand on the wall, letting its strength flow into me. The brick felt warm despite the morning chill, like it was holding on to all the years of honest work that had happened here. Later that night, my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It was Jessica, Sam's wife. The message was short. Need to talk. Now. I met her at the 24-hour diner where the colonel and I had planned our moves weeks ago. She sat in a corner booth, her normally perfect hair disheveled, makeup smeared like she'd been crying. 2 untouched coffee cups sat in front of her. I found everything, she said, before I could even sit down. Her voice had lost its usual courtroom polish. The forged documents, the hidden accounts, even Dad's original will. Her hands shook as she pushed a manila folder across the table. Sam kept it all in his home office safe, right behind our wedding photo. The irony might have made me laugh if it wasn't so damn sad. Remember those legal thriller movies where the smoking gun evidence shows up at the perfect moment? This was more like watching someone's world collapse in slow motion over cooling coffee. He told me you were unstable, Jessica continued, her lawyer mask cracking, that Dad chose him because you couldn't handle the responsibility. I believed him. God help me. I defended him in court. I just nodded, letting her talk. Sometimes silence hits harder than any accusation. The kids, her voice caught. They shouldn't grow up thinking this is okay, that you can just... She straightened up, and I saw the prosecutor emerge through the pain. I'm filing first thing tomorrow, taking them to my parents' farm in Tennessee, far from... She gestured vaguely at the town beyond the window. They'll be better off, I said quietly, thinking of how Sam used to brag about his perfect family at church socials while spreading lies about my service record. Jessica stood up, smoothing her rumpled blazer. The banks are already moving to freeze his accounts. Corporate fraud investigation. She paused, then added, I'm sorry, Michael, about everything. I watched her walk out into the dark parking lot, heels clicking softer than usual. Another piece of Sam's carefully built facade crumbling away. The next morning, my phone exploded with notifications. Local news had picked up Jessica's filing. The business pages were running stories about the frozen accounts. Sam's country club membership was suspended. His church board position, vacant. You ever watch a house of cards collapse? It's not the big dramatic crash people expect. It's more like watching each support get pulled away, one small piece at a time, until there's nothing left holding up the lies. The colonel showed up around 10, carrying 2 large coffees, and that knowing look he gets when justice is serving itself without his help. He set 1 cup in front of me and raised his own. Justice doesn't knock, he said with a slight smile. You drag it to your door. We clinked cups, the sound sharp and satisfying in my quiet apartment. Through the window, I could see the autumn sun hitting the garage's remaining brick walls. Not just walls anymore, more like a clean slate. I reached for Dad's old filing cabinet, pulled out the folder marked 67 Mustang Restoration Notes. Inside were his meticulous drawings, parts lists, and that old photo of us working on the engine when I was 12. The paper was yellowed now, but his handwriting was still clear and strong. What's the first step? The colonel asked, peering over my shoulder at the plans. I ran my finger down Dad's checklist, feeling the indents his pen had left in the paper. Frame inspection. Then full strip down. Build it back right, piece by piece. The colonel nodded, understanding this was about more than just the car. Need any help? I spread the diagrams across my kitchen table, each page a piece of the puzzle Dad had left behind. The morning light caught the coffee steam rising between us like garage smoke from those Sunday rebuilds so long ago. Yeah, I said, reaching for a pencil to start my own notes alongside Dad's. I think I do. 6 weeks. That's how long it took to rebuild Dad's 67 Mustang from the ground up. Every morning at 500, I'd limp into the temporary workshop space the VA had loaned me, coffee in one hand, Dad's restoration manual in the other. The colonel showed up most days around 7, rolling up his sleeves without a word. You know what precision means to military men? It's not just about getting things right. It's about honoring the process. Each component we restored became a ritual. Strip, clean, repair, replace if needed, reinstall. The rhythm of it settled into my bones like an old cadence call. Your father would have appreciated this attention to detail, the colonel said one afternoon, watching me measure thread pitch on replacement bolts. The smell of metal polish and leather cleaner hung thick in the air, just like those Sunday afternoons in Dad's garage when I was learning the difference between metric and standard wrenches. I'd sourced original parts where possible, hunting down period-correct components from specialty shops across 3 states. The engine rebuild alone took 2 weeks. Every evening, I'd clean tools while studying Dad's handwritten notes, his careful diagrams becoming a blueprint for redemption. Remember that torque wrench he gave us? The colonel asked one morning, pulling the familiar silver tool from his truck. Found it in my garage. Thought it should come home. My throat tightened. Dad had given us each one after we finished that first engine rebuild together. Precision isn't optional, he'd said, especially when you're fixing something that matters. The car came together like a prayer being answered, one part at a time. New wiring harness, rebuilt transmission, fresh upholstery that matched the original red leather exactly. Each completed system felt like absolution, washing away Sam's betrayal with honest work and earned sweat. The VA paperwork for display space came through on a Tuesday. Special exhibition waiver for Historical Veteran Family Legacy Preservation. The colonel's influence again, though he'd never admit it. Loadouts tomorrow at 0800, he said, handing me the approval forms. Better finish that clear coat tonight. We worked until midnight, laying down the final protective layer over the restored candy apple paint. Dad's signature color, the same shade he'd used on his first restoration back in '75. The shop lights caught every curve and angle, making the metal look alive. Morning brought setup crew and transport equipment. The colonel supervised loading while I did one final systems check. Oil pressure perfect. Timing exact. Every gauge reading true. Even the radio picked up AM stations clear as summer sky. The VA Center's display space stretched wide, walls painted marine blue to set off the classic cars. They'd reserved the center spot for Dad's Mustang, angled just right to catch morning light through the eastern windows. Perfect stance. The colonel nodded as we positioned her. The car sat level, proud, ready for inspection. Just like Dad would have wanted. I opened the glove box one last time, feeling the fresh leather smooth against my fingers. From my pocket, I pulled Dad's steel keyring, the one thing Sam hadn't managed to steal or destroy. The metal was worn from decades of honest work, each key telling its own story of doors opened and engines started. The colonel watched as I placed it inside, understanding in his eyes. Some symbols don't need explaining between men who've served, whether in combat zones or auto shops. Your father built more than cars, he said quietly. He built legacy, honor, the things that last. I closed the glove box with a soft click, ran my hand along the dashboard one more time. Through the windshield, I could see our reflections in the polished paint. 2 soldiers standing guard over something precious, something restored. The morning sun crept across the showroom floor, lighting up the Mustang's chrome trim like battlefield medals. Somewhere in the building, I heard voices discussing the upcoming exhibition, but for now, it was just us, the car, and the kind of silence that falls after a mission well done. Opening day brought more than just visitors. It brought ghosts. Good ones, the kind that remind you what matters. Michael? Michael Callahan. The voice hit me before I saw the face. Old Joe Martinez, Dad's first customer back in '75, squinting at me through thick glasses. Lord Almighty, you're the spitting image of your father standing there. Have you ever felt memories rush back so fast they almost knock you over? The smell of Joe's cherry tobacco mixing with engine degreaser, his careful hands showing me how to read wear patterns on brake pads when I was barely tall enough to see over the fender. "Joe," I managed, my voice rougher than intended. "Didn't know if you'd make it." He wrapped me in a bear hug that smelled of the same cherry tobacco. "Wouldn't miss it, son. Your daddy taught half the county how to respect good metal." More faces emerged from my past as the morning wore on. Bill Thompson, who'd argued carburetor theory with Dad over expensive cigars. The Whitaker brothers, who'd supplied parts for 30 years from their salvage yard. Each greeting felt like another piece of home clicking back into place. The colonel stood near the Mustang, answering technical questions with military precision. But I caught his slight nod when he saw the steady stream of Dad's old friends filling the exhibition space. This wasn't just a car show. It was a homecoming. Local news crews started arriving around noon. Channel 4 wanted interviews about family legacy and veteran communities. Channel 7 focused on the restoration process. But it was the small brass plaque mounted beside the car that kept drawing people's attention. Built by Grateful Son, Twice Forged Soldier. 8 words that said everything without saying too much. The colonel's idea, he understood the power of understatement. "Your father would have approved," Joe said, reading the plaque for the 3rd time. "Simple, true, no flash needed when you've got substance." The afternoon brought more cameras, more handshakes, more stories about Dad that I'd either forgotten or never knew. Each one felt like a small victory over Sam's attempted erasure of our family's real history. Around 3, my phone buzzed. Text from Bill Thompson. "Check social media. Someone tagged your brother in the exhibition photos." I found the post easily enough. Professional shots of the Mustang gleaming under VA center lights. Dad's story summarized in respectful paragraphs. And there in the comments, Sam's profile tagged multiple times. No responses from him. Just silence. But an hour later, another photo started circulating. Grainy, shot on someone's phone through a streaked window. Sam in a grease-stained apron, working the grill at some Fayetteville diner. The ceiling light above him flickered, casting uneven shadows across his face. He looked older, harder, nothing like the polished businessman who'd tried to steal our father's legacy. "Karma's got a mean sense of timing," the colonel muttered, showing me the same photo on his phone, though I suspect that broken light's the least of his worries now. More visitors filtered through as evening approached. Veterans bringing their kids, mechanics comparing notes on restoration techniques. Each conversation felt like another brick rebuilt in the foundation Sam had tried to destroy. Joe caught me near closing time, pressing something into my palm. A cigar. The exact brand Dad used to save for special occasions. "He'd want you to have this one," Joe said. "Light it when you're ready." I slipped it into my jacket pocket, next to the VA exhibition program, with Dad's name printed in clean black letters. Proper recognition, finally. The way it should have been all along. The colonel helped the staff lock up, double-checking security measures around the Mustang. Professional habit. Protect what matters. Through the windows, I watched the sunset paint the car's restored paint with strips of gold. Like Dad used to say, good work catches light, different than shortcuts. The last rays of sunlight caught the Mustang's chrome trim, making it wink like my father's smile when he'd finished a particularly challenging repair. I ran my hand along the fender one final time, feeling every curve and seam we'd restored together. Me, the colonel, and Dad's memory guiding every move. "Excuse me, sir?" I turned to find a young VA staff member, couldn't have been more than 25, holding his tablet like a shield. "I was wondering about the key ring mentioned in the display notes, the one that belonged to your father." The question hit me square in the chest, warm and unexpected. You know those moments when the past and present line up just right? This was one of them. I could smell the mixture of coffee and motor oil that always clung to Dad's work shirts, hear the jingle of those keys as he'd lock up each night. That key ring, I said, was more than just metal. It was everything Dad believed in. Every key opened something he'd earned through honest work and kept through dedication. My fingers traced the edge of the glove box where it now rested. He carried it for 43 years. Never lost a single key. The young man nodded, typing quickly. And it survived the fire? No, I shook my head. It survived something worse. Betrayal. Sam tried to erase Dad's legacy, but he couldn't touch what those keys stood for. Quality, integrity, the kind of honor you can't fake. A comfortable silence settled between us as the kid processed that. Behind him, the colonel was shepherding the last few visitors toward the exit, his military efficiency showing through even in civilian clothes. One more question? The staffer looked almost apologetic. Why keep it in the glove box instead of using it? That made me smile. The kind of smile that comes from understanding something that took too long to learn. Because some things are worth more as symbols than tools. Dad knew that. It's why he left it to me instead of Sam. Not for the shop keys, but for what they represented. He thanked me and headed for the door, tablet tucked under his arm. I followed him out into the autumn evening, where the air had that crisp edge that always reminded me of working late in the garage with Dad, watching our breath cloud in the fluorescent lights. Standing there on the VA center steps, I took my first deep breath in what felt like years. You ever notice how some moments feel like turning points, even while you're living them? This was one of those. The weight I'd been carrying since coming home, since finding those forged papers, since watching Sam burn Dad's letter. It finally started to lift. Sam was gone now, flipping burgers under flickering lights. The shop's purpose lived on through the exhibition, teaching new generations about craft and care. And that '67 Mustang? It gleamed inside like a testament to everything Dad believed in. I thought about that key ring sitting in the glove box, untouched. Each key a story, each scratch a lesson. Dad used to say every mark on those keys came from earning trust or keeping faith. Now they rested like artifacts in a shrine to honest work and lasting worth. The colonel joined me outside, his footsteps precise, even on casual concrete. Ready to call it a day? I nodded, feeling something I hadn't felt since before my last deployment. Peace. Real, solid peace. The kind that comes from knowing you've done right by someone's memory. Blood rusts, I said quietly, quoting Dad's last lesson. Honor endures. The colonel's expression softened just slightly, the closest he came to a smile most days. He understood. We both did. Sometimes the strongest steel isn't in engines or tools, but in the principles that outlast the men who taught them. For the first time in over a year, I smiled. Not the tight, defensive smile I'd worn through physical therapy, or the bitter one I'd forced during Sam's betrayals. A real smile, full of something like hope. I believe stories like this find us for a reason. If this one touched you, please subscribe. I share a new one every day, and tomorrow's might be the one your heart's been waiting for.